terrorism. Open quote, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards and Ministry of Intelligence Security were directly involved in the planning and support of terrorist acts and continue to exhort a variety of groups, especially Palestinian groups, with leadership cards in Syria and Lebanese Hezbollah, to use terrorism in pursuit of their goals. In addition, the Revolutionary Guards was increasingly involved in supplying lethal assistance to Iraqi militant groups which destabilized Iraq. According to a Canadian proposal for enlisting Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist entity in Canada, defining the RGC as a branch, open quote, defining the Revolutionary Guards as a branch of armed forces of another country is a misnomer. The Revolutionary Guards is more like Hezbollah or Hamas, which are ideologically based organizations that develop military, business, social, and cultural capacities to advance their agenda. The military aspect is just one dimension of a unique ideological mandate that's virtually borderless, allowing the Revolutionary Guards a multitude of political, cultural, economic, as well as military functions. Amid growing concerns of expanding Revolutionary Guards and affiliated organizations' presence and influence in the region and the spread of terrorist activities in Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. Department of State listed the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist entity in October 2007. The Treasury Department also designated the RGC's extraterritorial branch, the Quds Force, for providing material support to the Taliban and other terrorist organizations. Is the Islamic Republic of Iran a terrorist state? State terrorism is a controversial concept as that of terrorism itself. When it was first entered into political discourse, the word terrorism was used in reference to the reign of terror imposed by the Jacobin regime to describe a case of terrorist state terrorism. There are also quite a few historical studies of some of other instances of state terrorism, most notably of the period of the Great Terror in the Soviet Union. In a contemporary setting, however, the state terrorism is apparently much more difficult to discern. Discussion of terrorism in social sciences and philosophy tend to focus on non-state and more often than not anti-state terrorism. In common parlance and in the media, terrorism is as a rule assumed to be an activity of non-state agencies in virtue of the very meaning of that word. Referring to state terrorism in the United Nations Convention in 2005, it was stated that the behavior of states was already heavily circumscribed by conventions governing the use of force, such as the Geneva Convention. Therefore, the term terrorism must not be equally applied to states and non-state actors. In other words, state terrorism or a state terror state is not a politically correct term in the United Nations literature, and states who commit acts of terror against their own population or the population of another country, as in the case of the current regime in Iran, cannot be legally dealt with outside the Geneva Convention. One of the characteristics of terrorism, targeting innocent civilians, stands out in efforts to distinguish state terrorism from other forms of state violence. However, we have witnessed in modern history authoritarian states systematically committed to using violence and extreme version of threat against their own civilian, exemplified the premise of state terrorism. Nazi Germany, as John Paul mentioned it, the Soviet Union under the state Stalin's rule are frequently cited as historical cases of state terrorism. Since the 1979, when the Islamist state was formed in Iran, the most brutal application of force and intimidation against the civilian population has been exhorted, and thanks to modern technology, a glimpse of that state brutality and barbarity against civilians was displayed after the 2009 state presidential elections in Iran. According to Amnesty International, starting in August 1988 and continuing until shortly before the 10th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in January 1989, the Iranian authorities carried out massive wave of executions of political prisoners, the largest since those carried out in the first and second year after the Iranian Revolution in 1979. In all, between estimated 4,500 to 5,000 prisoners are believed to have been killed, including women. Quite contrary to the current Iranian president's assertion that Iran does not commit terror, but Iran is victims of terror, the Iranian Islamic regime has used the Ministry of Intelligence Security to gather intelligence to plan terrorist attacks inside and outside Iran against dissidents and adversaries. The ministry is believed to use liaison activities with supported terrorist groups and Islamic fundamentalist movements. According to accounts, especially the highly charged Mykonos affair, the ministry itself is believed to have carried out some terrorist acts mostly directed at local dissidents, where in its April 10, 1997 ruling, the German court issued an international arrest warrant for Iranian intelligence minister Ali Fallahian after declaring that the assassination had been ordered by him, with now the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and then the President Hashemi Rafsanjani. In addition, 19 of Ahmadinejad's ministers were commander of notorious Revolutionary Guards, a newly listed terrorist entity. From 1979 to 1992, the Islamic State in Iran carried out terrorist activities through political assassination against high-level dissidents, targeting totaling more than 150 extrajudicial killings in countries around the world, including the killing of Dr. Abdul-Rahman Ghassemlou and two of his aides in 1989 in Vienna, Austria. More than 300 members of various Kurdish and non-Kurdish Iranian dissident groups were randomly killed in Iraqi Kurdistan and Turkey from 1992 to 1997 by the agents of the Revolutionary Guards and Intelligence Ministry. The serial murders of the period of 1988 to 1998 that resulted in the disappearance and murder of more than 80 writers, political activists, and ordinary citizens was also carried out by the Intelligence Ministry. Ghassemlou's murder, an act of state terror. The Iranian high official leaders, including the Supreme Leader, has had a history of ordering the assassinations of opposition figures. According to Roland, he was also recently indicted in the assassination of renowned Lebanese politician Rafiq Hariri with the direct order from the regime's Supreme Leader Khamenei. German authorities have also said Dr. Ghassemlou's murder, as well as the assassination of his successor Dr. Sharif Behruz in Berlin in 1992, have been ordered by top Iranian officials. In a piece in Liberation, Mark Crowitz, I got only a few minutes, affirmed that Ghassemlou's death warrant was signed as early as 1979, when he was elected as the only self-confessed secularist in Iran's Constituent Assembly. July 13, 1989, the day when Muslims celebrate the Feast of Pardon, was also observed by Shiites as the 40th day of mourning for the death of Imam Khomeini. Was that only a coincidence, he says? Or did the murderers, disguised as peace envoys with an official mandate from former Iranian President Hashemi Rafsanjani and passport signed by former Foreign Ministry Velayati, came from Tehran deliberately to carry out the sentence on that ritual day? In summary, considering all the weight and open-ended definition of terrorism, the assassination of Dr. Ghassemlou and his aides by the mercenaries of the Caliphate regime in Iran on negotiation table was first and foremost an act to eliminate opponents through terror, and secondly, to spread intimidation and fear in the expatriate Iranian community. Regardless of the definition, if you commit acts of terror, and this is John's quote, you are a terrorist. One is a thief, whether one gets caught or not. However, when a thief is caught, there must be punishment. The Iranian regime has committed in the past many acts of terror, so regardless of the international law surrounding state sovereignty, they must be considered terrorism. Furthermore, the Islamic regime in Iran has been caught red-handed in the Mykonos murder, the Jewish center in Argentina, the American Khobar Arab bomb bombing in Saudi Arabia, the Rafiq Hariri's murder, and the list goes on and on. And these should be enough legal basis to consider the Islamic regime, the Islamist regime in Iran, a terrorist state. Had the Austrian authorities allowed for the impartial and independent investigation of Dr. Ghassemlou's case, the truth about the terrorist nature of this regime might have been even more easily exposed. Thank you very much.